This is a reading from the 11th Major Arcana of the Mebes Tarot Majors course, which is Force or Strength. Pathway from Gevurah to Tifereth, represented by the Hebrew letter Kaf. Force is a magical chain. The sign of Arcanum 11, Kaf, has a numerical value 11, which deconstructs 2, meaning that the force can be used in 2 ways. The astrological correspondence of the Arcanum is the planet Mars. The titles of the Arcanum in the field of the Theosophical Ternary are Divine Vis, Human Vis, and Vis Naturalis, or in other words, the 3 modes of manifestation of force. The title of the card is Leo Dominatus, the Dominated Lion. The card depicts a girl who, without effort and with a complete aplomb, opens or closes the mouth of a lion. The maiden has an infinity sign of astral light above her head. It is easy to understand the picture's content. She presents the necessary conditions for the emergence and use of evolutionary forces. Such conditions are knowledge of the astral, purity of intentions, and self-confidence. The arithmetic analysis of the Arcanum gives us certain indications as to the creation of force and the mechanism of application. 11 equals 1 plus 10, and 11 equals 10 plus 1. In the first deconstruction, the monad governs a closed system, 10. Translating it to the common language, we say that only a will must govern a current formed by individual links. This is the formula of the collective entities governed by the hierarchy. The second deconstruction tells us that a current, 10, composed of individual entities, must manifest externally as a single unit. That is, for a community to exist, it must at all levels be in line with the aims of its members. 11 also equals 2 plus 9, and 11 equals 9 plus 2. The first formula tells us that the human inability to neutralize the binaries, 2, leads the initiates, 9, to work and manifest their strength, 11. Sorry, emails. I always forget that. The second formula will be read as follows. The force, 11, of the initiates, 9, consists in the use for the inability of others to neutralize the binaries, 2. 11 equals 3 plus 8, and 11 equals 8 plus 3. The first version is the force, 11, consists in being productive, 3, within the established law, 8. The second version gives force is the preservation of law within productivity, which is 3, already existing. 11 equals 4 plus 7, and 11 equals 7 plus 4. The dependence of elements, for, regardless of the interpretation of this term, arises in man to the action of secondary causes, 7, and thereby makes him strong, 11. All the causes, 7, govern the elements, 4, and this results in force, 11. This last interpretation indicates clearly the necessity of participation in the magical current beyond the pentagrams, also of the elementals, 4, who, knowing the mysteries of the mechanism of involution, help in the purposes of the chain. These elementals, however, must be submitted to pentagrammatic elements of the chain, which in turn are supported by influences. 11 equals 5 plus 6, or 6 plus 5. The first decomposition gives the normal formula for activity in ceremonial magic, which is the microcosm 5 operates on the macrocosm 6. The second decomposition will give the normal formula for divination in the astral plane, a purely passive operation, which is the macrocosm gives direction to the contemplating microcosm. And in fact, and in other combination, lies part of the secrets of the Force. Now I will try to briefly convey the etiology and general history of the implementation of the Force on our planet by the formation of magic circuits controlled by certain egregores. The most typical form of such chains is collectivities professing one religion or another, and therefore, to some extent, I have the right to say that I am giving you at the moment a sketch of the emergence and development of religious teachings. But this itself obliges me to outline, with brief strokes, in as pure and primitive a form as possible, the view of the initiates on the question of the fall and reintegration of man. I begin by reminding you of the composition of the first family, standing as a transcendental group above the sephira of metaphysical, ethical, and concrete content. The members of this family, transcendental love, transcendental life, the Logos, or Adam Kadmon, and the Jack of the Logos, or servant of the Logos, emanating from the crown of the second family, are already known to you. The latter emanates the crown of the second family. The second family itself is generated by the Jack in the following complex of mystical persons. The Sephira Keta, in which the macroprosopo of the family remains. That's 1. 2. The Sephira Hokmah, in which the father of the family should remain, and where, in the primordial state, was the androgynous complex of human souls, forming only one organism called Adam Protoplaster. 3. The Sephira Binah is the natural position of the mother of the family, and the primordial place of the permanence of the complex of angels. The souls were to perform the evolutionary work of the triangle of fire, all subtle, all to raise, keeping uninterrupted the ascending currents of the great closed system of the 10 Sephira of the universe. The activity of the angels, limiting the sphere, gives activity of souls, corresponding to the involutive work of the triangle from water. The angels concretize the subtle, coagulate it, governing the totality of the descending flow of the closed system of the second family. 4. The 6 Sephira, Sephiroth, Chesed, Geburah, Tiferath, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, serve in their entirety as the place of residence of the family microprosopo. Microprosopo is androgynous. The centre of the body is the Sephira Tiferath, and the organs through which he acts upon the bride constitute the Sephira Yesod. The right side of the microprosopus contains 2 positively polarized organs, Chesed, mercy, and Netzach, victory. These 2 organs of the microprosopo are constituted by souls and used for evolutionary purposes. The left side of the microprosopo contains negatively polarized organs, Kibura, severity, and Hod, peace, both created by the influence of the angels and destined for involutionary ends. Thus, from the father, the microprosopo received evolutionary possibilities that the mother limited to the involutive ones. The personality of the microprosopo determined central Sephira Tiferath, its activity downward into the Sephira Yesod. Now the purpose of microprosopis is clear. The whole field of, in Latin, cognito, in Hebrew, da'ath, will be the sephira of this activity, of his activity, or its activity. This sphere is neutralized by harmony and should be considered androgynous. It is very complex in composition, and therein lies the danger of a possible violation of its functions. A purely active individuality or a purely passive complex never needs such keen protection and such proper nutrition as androgynous complexes. We find something similar to this in all double-acting mechanisms. They work well as long as all the rules for dealing with them are met to the finer point. The slightest violation of these rules entails grandiose changes in their action and violates the harmony of their composition. 5. The Sephira Malkuth, the natural abode of the spouse of microprosopis, that is, the scope of elementary implementations, which is closely dependent on the performance of the microprosopo, and is always calculated in composition according to its state. I'll show you a figure which gives a diagram of the initial distribution of the elements of the universe in the Sephira of the first family. This scheme is called institutio. Later the falls occurred. The da'ath sphere, the Sephira of the microprosopo, in its quality of an androgynous complex, reflected in a similar way both what he received from the Logos and his servitor, the Jack, and what came from a still higher level, that of the perfect androgyne. It reflected from the upper point above the first yod. The difference between the manifestations of these three androgynous units consists in this. A. The upper point receives nothing, it only sends a transcendental flow. B. The Logos nourishes itself with the transcendental influx and in turn sends the transcendental flow onward. C. The Sephira of the microprosopis receives the transcendent influx already enveloped in a slightly nebulous form, and transmits it, even more condensed, to the sphere of definite forms, that is, to the world of the formation of seminal principles. The highest point is self-existing, the Logos is independent, Da'ath is only harmonic, and Malkuth only dense. The Sephira Da'ath intended to create an illusion of independence for itself. For this it needed freedom, without which there can be no independent life. But the desire for freedom was tantamount to a refusal of food transmitted by the higher influx. This refusal was processed, and what happened is called the fall of the sixth Sephira, and is what led to these Sephira to the kabbalistic death. Not fed by higher currents, the very subtle shell of these Sephira coagulated into what we now call the lower astral. The Sephirotic organism is fragmented. Its polarities appear as unresolved binaries. The Sephira Tiferath has ceased to emanate its light. The differentiation of the cells that made up Da'ath went to extremes, and its name became Legion. Here is a so-called fall of angels, which revealed to the universe the mystery of death. And there's another figure. The contents of the Sephira Malkuth, that is, of the Bride of Da'ath, also coagulated correspondingly, nevertheless continuing to serve as the field of manifestation of the fallen legion Da'ath. In other words, Malkuth has become the field of the densest manifestation of non-neutralized binaries. It can be said symbolically that during this period, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is grown in Malkuth. Although the contents of the 6 Sephirah of the microprosopode declined, the principles governing Sephirotic construction remained immutable, just as a code of laws remains in force even if it is transgressed by all citizens without exception. Souls and angels were faced with the task of refilling empty spaces with formal manifestations in order to save Malkuth, which these manifestations would begin to impregnate. And through Malkuth, her spouse, the fallen Da'ath, could be saved. Da'ath, however, did not want to lose the acquired freedom by the process of restoring the tree of life, that is, the astral light's Tifereth. Therefore, Da'ath seduces the passive side of the Sephirah of souls, Heva, leading him to experiment with the binaries of the Sephirah Malkuth, the most coagulated elements of the universe, as convenient reference points for applying personal power. Heva, Eve, letting herself be seduced, formally grasps this thought, that is, tastes the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Having mastered the system of binaries, Heva, the passive side, conducts it into the active practice of souls, which bears the name of the final Adam. The name Mem of the final Adam. Thus the wife gives her husband the same fruit. The active side of souls, above all, applies the binary basis to the content of the Sephirah Chokmah itself. Adam and Heva, Adam and Eve, recognize themselves as poles of a non-neutralized binary, that is, no more a couple, but a couple of opposites. Hence, shame and the subsequent need to cover themselves with clothes, that is, new shells or coagulations. But the principle of binary perceptions is carried out further, and the whole Adam protoplast crumbles into cells that become both more compact and surrounded by shell bodies, the more differentiation advances. The power and the authority of the Sephirah Chokmah and the subtlety of its content, the souls, cell souls, are not the inferior astral, such as the elements of the Da'ath Legion, but of what we now call matter. These cells become subject to time and space, and this is their bondage. They broke away from the higher current, but became slaves of space and time. Due to these changes, the Sephirotic scheme of the universe transforms itself from institutio into destitutio, disorganization, disaggregation. So this is the destitutio. What could the upper Sephiroth do, whose harmony was affected by the fall of souls? The collectivity of the angels, generating entities called spiritus directors, spreads through its influence on all the astral subplanes. Imbued with its involving task, it generates elementals, thus penetrating into Malkuth, since the elementals have material bodies that constitute the physical basis of the universe. There is a popular expression stating that angels materialize the kingdom Malkuth, so that the astral devils cannot rejoice there. The content of Kita, the soul of the Messiah, being androgynous, spreads throughout the region of microprosopo, recreating the Sephirah in order to later fertilize Malkuth through a redemptive atonement incarnation. This is the plan represented by the scheme called constituted epoch. Below Adam Belial in this figure are indicated angels and souls in the scheme of the constituted epoch. So, the influence of the incarnation of the Messiah should give an impetus to the souls, awaken them from sleep within matter, cause them to evolutionary effort, fully armed with their three planes, giving them magical superiority over the fallen earth. The latter can manifest itself in the physical world only with the possibility of mediumistic loans. Souls, striving for reintegration into the Sephra Hokmah, will progressively thin out not only their shells, but also the whole Sephra Malkuth in which they work. And, following the wife, Malkuth, the husband, fallen to earth, rises as well. In this way, the souls work in order to realize the ideal, the so-called restitutio, or restoration of the primordial state of the Sephirothic system of the second family. Now let's take a look at the history of fallen humanity. The fall did not happen instantly. The compaction and thickening of the shells of fallen humanity also occurred gradually, being accompanied by the progressive oblivion of past perfection and the slow adaptation to the new deplorable condition. Obviously, it should be assumed that different individuals, i.e. in different Adam protoplast cells, forgot this, and adaptation came at different speeds. We now need to consider what can be forgotten and what cannot be forgotten from past greatness. Imagine the period when fallen humanity visibly lost the ability to receive the influence of the Yod of the first family, but still retained the receptivity to the less transcendental reflexes. At that time, the memory of the past, religion, was expressed by the worship and abstract veneration of the first Hay of the first family, that is, the cult of the great principle of one life. Naturally, the adherents of this religion occupied an incomparably higher position than those of the adherents of the various practical philosophies, modern, such as the struggle for life, etc. But nevertheless, the religion of the one life is shadowed in comparison with the religion of transcendental love, illuminating the protoplast before his fall. We will not deal here with the continent where the relatively happy adherents of the one life are, nor will we make chronological assumptions about the corresponding epoch. For us, this is not the essential. However, it is necessary to make a slight outline of what constituted the ethical natural code of the followers of this religion. They respected the one life in all its manifestations. For them, the same life flowed with its powerful force both through the mineral, blade of grass, the smallest specimen of the animal kingdom, as through the human being. They had not yet lost their understanding of the evolutionary power of life. After all, souls originally from the Sephra Hokmah, and therefore very much loved and appreciated it, considering as good everything that collaborated with the flow of life, and as evil everything that would contradict it. Here is the form in which the tradition gives us their practical commandments. To confess the metaphysical principle of one life. Do not fractionate this life metaphysically, that is, do not multiply it in mental principles. Do not fractionate it astrally, that is, do not apply the mystery of the dynamic cycle in the direction diverging from the usual hierarchical direction. Do not obscure it, destroying in physical terms the memory of the emanational origin of all life. Respect those who gave you life, including the parents on the physical plane. past life yourself chastely and consciously. Do not attempt an individual life on the physical plane. Do not encroach on property related to the life of an individual in the physical plane. And do not encroach on the astral plane against what is connected with some individual life, neither passively by lying, nor actively with envy. Let us now turn to the second period of human fall and the second possible religion. Although humanity at that time had already lost its clear understanding of transcendental life, it had not yet abandoned the idea of the Logos, the great architect of the universe. At this stage of the fall, there was no longer an intuition of the unity of life, but the understanding of the unity of the sources of ideals had still been maintained. Since all ideals are generated by the Logos, there could be no opposition between them. At the moment of difficulties, at the moment of choosing decisions, at the moment of possible disappointments, an adherent of the religion of the Logos calls for help to him, asks for alms in the form of an ideal that could save him. In the next stage of the fall, the image of the Logos is erased from human hearts, but remains still the image of the second Hay, the Jack, or the first family, that is, the ideals themselves. There is no one to turn to for ideals, but if you are ready, you can try to escape. Belief in the second Hay of the first family smoothly descends to the level of the Macroprosopo, religion of the second family, its top point over the Yod. And then the transcendental religion of the father of the second family will come down, which boils down to the memory of the Sephirah Hokmah about the presence and permanence in her of all souls, cells of a single being, the Adam protoplast. This religion will be a clear understanding of the principle of human brotherhood with the loss of consciousness of the brotherhood of man with entities of the involutive type, that is, angels. After all, at this stage, Kita is forgotten, as therefore forgotten Hokmah and Binah are its two manifestations, which must carry out the circular cycle of life of the second family in fraternal and friendly work, the work of the life cycle of the second family. And if you lose the understanding of the brotherhood, then the situation becomes dangerous. Sometimes egoism begins to reign, leading to anarchistic manifestations, up to the veneration of the legion of dark forces, up to the struggle with the normal formula of dynamic evolutionary processes, up to the exchange of one's personality with the legion of passions, strictly analogous to the legion of demons in the lower astral. Humanity as a whole, as well as for individual races and nationalities, has experienced, is and will continue to experience the listed types of religions and, unfortunately, even the phase of anarchic fractionation of individuals described at the very end of the list. Of course, the task of reintegration seemed most clearly and conveniently fulfilled in that era when the simple, but deeply wise primitive religion of one life did not manage to get lost or distorted. Whatever the temptations that have torn off most of humanity from it, it is certain that the loss of the majority was immediately followed by the reaction of attempts to return humanity to ancient wisdom by preaching. The reactionaries, champions of a return to the old world view, quite rightly called themselves initiates, and those who fell from the cult of one life profane. The first, in fact, had preserved a certain contact with the pure reflex of the first Hay, while the second had obscured and distorted it, or in other words profaned it. The former were not saints, they also fell as protoplastic cells, but, nevertheless, remained indirectly touched by holiness, as if preserving its reflection. Their attempts to return humanity to the true path resulted in more or less complex schemes, depending on the degree of decline in their environment, and subsequently on the living conditions of the ethnic group that made up this environment, groups. These attempts can be called by a common name, foundation of religions. Frequently, the teachers who instituted the religions dealt with an environment where most people were on the verge of losing even the conception of the human fraternity. This is, to lose the memory of the Sefer HaChokmah. Therefore, instructors should remind men of the brotherhood of souls, re-establish the understanding of the great involutive evolutionary flow, that is, of Jacob's ladder, in which on the left side descend the angels, Binah, by the right ascend the souls, Hokmah, whilst the radiant macroprosopus, Sefer Akita, always remains on his throne. Establish respect for teachers, whose role is analogous to the second hay of the first family, which, mysteriously and by emanation, transmits the higher influx via emanations to the second family. Instructors should also lead men to lose their proud pretension of wanting to transform the universe according to their personal comfort, and convince them of the necessity of the contrary, that is, from the hermetic transformation of one's own personality, shaping it to resemble, albeit quite remotely, the Logos' androgynous harmonic image. They should seek to purify the characters in the name of the first hay of the first family, that is, try to get human beings to understand and apply the one life guidelines outlined above. The instructor should also work so that humanity, purified by the true religion, may again become able to receive the influx of the Yod, to subtilize its shells, and having raised the Sefer Malkuth and his spouse, the microprosopo, to recreate for himself the collective oneness, that is, the Adam protoplast, inside the Sefer HaChokmah. This would constitute the full reintegration of humanity, restoring the oneness of Adam protoplast in the Sephirah. In order for these goals to be achieved, the initiates realized and performed the Arcanum of force, joining in currents controlled by egregoric principles. The mental nuclei of these egregores, in essence, have always been reduced and are reduced to the principles of the unified primordial religion, carried out in their entirety or in private groups. The astral part of the egregore is born when the mental principles mentioned are involved with a form. The physical body of the egregore corresponds to the manifestation of worship on the physical plane. Of course, the physical body of the egregore depends strictly on its astrosome and on the environment in which religion is founded and on which nourishes the same egregore, manifesting itself in different countries and can give birth to many different cults. Based on these data, we will deduce that the foundation of a religion can be compared to the formation of a collective whirlwind. The activity of this whirlwind will depend on the dynamics of its Yod-He-Vav-He cycles. Of these cycles, the most important for us is the first, the one that begins in the point above the Yod. However, it should not be forgotten that religion, so to speak, embodies, with the purpose of finding for itself, adepts. Because of this, it must have, in addition to elements of the dynamic cycle Yod-He-Vav-He, some kind of magnet, such as Shin, capable of winning followers, or, in other words, facilitating the penetration and dissemination on the physical plane. This one magnet, besides attracting to the egregore those who are in tune with it, should also serve as a bond to retain those whose pentagram would be tempted to break the link already established and move away from the egregore. Thus, the first cycle of a religious whirlwind can be expressed by the formula point Yod-He-Shin-Vav-He, and defined as the materialization of the total or partial aspect of the teaching of the one source of truth in order to spiritualize a given environment. The symbolism of the terms of the first cycle of a religious whirlwind can be explained by the following scheme, which could also be called the plan of a religion. The point above the Yod corresponds to the purposes of the creation of an egregore. These must be selfless in the broadest sense of the word. The yod corresponds to the metaphysical content, which is a general or particular reflection of the one philosophy. The first he is constituted by the state and the conditions of the environment in which the religion is founded. The shin is the aspect of the egregore capable of attracting and retaining adepts. The vow and the cult itself, the child of the environment, fertilized by the principle of esoteric oneness. The second he represents the final link of the first cycle, linking the preceding elements in the family and determines the influence of that family, that is, the influence of the whole current on the external world. This link can be called the politics of a religion. Let us now ask ourselves what elements are needed to form a living, egregious current. These elements are the point above the yod, that is, the existence of a scheme of egregoric ideas and forms. Yod, the person of the instructor, possessing a mystical and astral power. The first he, a prepared environment. Shin, the possession by the chain of a certain contingent of concrete facts or astral cliches to ensure proselytism and provide a guarantee against a schism or away from followers. Vow, a set of valuable principles around the instructor. And according to the second he, a community of good believers. We will not go into details about the astral birth of the egregore. We will discuss this in Arcanum 15, which is the devil. The conditions necessary for the life of an egregore, the causes of its illness or death, have already been mentioned in broad outlines. Now let's just say a few words about the need to introduce in the egregoric current, beyond the energy of the pentagrammatic entities of an evolutionary type, living and disembodied human beings, also the energy of the elementals, spirits, directors, and even angels, since it should not be forgotten that egregores use this current involution to transmit the teachings to the earth. Only later does it help the evolution of your adepts. In popular parlance, it is said that a magical current is formed of living men, dead men, and elementals of various kinds. Regarding what the personality of the instructor-director should look like, we can find sufficient information by studying the history of religions and their founders. The preparedness in the environment is most often determined by its ethical, less often material, adversities, which led it to the awareness of the need for improvement. Nations and people have epochs in which their own perversity or their own ignorance becomes intolerable. Then they crave religious renewal and willingly go to meet their master. The Shin element most often comes to fulfill prophecies or so-called miracles of the teacher and his disciples, and the disciples. However, sometimes in a certain environment these elements are successfully replaced by features of the form in which religion teaches unitary philosophy, or even the content of philosophy itself. These rare cases require a high ethical and cultural level and generally guarantee the egregore a long period of life. Disciples fall into two main categories. 1. Main disciples, what could be called apostles of the doctrine, and in its totality should represent the four hermetic types, that of the eagle or bold thinkers, the lion or ardent natures, that of man or clear, logical and provident minds, and the bull, persevering workers. 2. Secondary disciples, who, as a whole, should be carriers of the active element, the yod, love of metaphysics right up to paradox, the passive element, he, manifesting as intuition and extreme, almost hysterical sensitivity, the androgynous element, vow, that is, the ability to convey to others their sympathy and interest in the teaching, the ability to infuse it and spread it by personal methods going to the point of exaggeration. the element of service, second hay, discipline and applicability to the ethical requirements of the doctrine, up to the desire for complete self-sacrifice. As for believers, the possibility of observing and evaluating their abilities and psyche should be determined so as to be able, among them, to choose as disciples those who stand out from the general level and can actively serve the Igogore. It is very dangerous to not bring closer to the initiation center those cells of the body of the chain whose energy is manifested consciously and with due intensity. It is as dangerous as artificially inhibiting the flow of healthy blood to nourish the noblest organs of any individual. In conclusion, we will speak about the dangers that threaten religion and the nature of the machinations of these enemies. A finished or emerging religion can be undermined in three ways. Mentally, religion is ruined by a mixture of scholastics in its theology. This is an involution of the ideological part of religion. In the astral plane, religion is undermined by an admixture of aesthetic principles in its formal ritual. The pursuit of the beauty of symbols undermines their purity. This is an involution of forms of ritual use. In physical terms, religion is undermined by an admixture of sensory, emotional manifestations authorized by its code. Remember the historically confirmed fragility of cults that encouraged sensual manifestations at religious festivals. They did not have a long life. Now I will begin to review the most important teachings in chronological order and dealing mainly with their etiology, only occasionally resorting to historical references to facts. He's going to begin with Krishna, but it's time for a break. That'll be in the next part.